Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the good, the bad and the downright ugly of Liz Truss's performance on the Ukraine crisis so far, which is a big test for any Foreign Secretary, you would say. And we need to remember that she has replaced Dominic Raab's travesty of an effort during the Afghan withdrawal that sealed his fate in the role. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, when it comes to cabinet ministers in Boris Johnson's government, the bar is quite low for expectations. He appoints on the basis of blind allegiance to the glorious mop-headed leader, not competence or even political acumen. And we should also remember that Liz Truss is Foreign Secretary during the first major European conflict for 2 decades, but could have been Prime Minister. There was a suggestion that Johnson might have been kicked out of office over losing the safest seat the Tories have last December. So had that happened, by now the leadership contest could have been returning the new Prime Minister, and that could have been Liz Truss. She is one of the front runners. So it's important to see how a potential next Prime Minister is shaping up in the heat of a major international crisis. And you may think this is going to be a litany of woe. After all, some of her cock-ups so far have been widely reported, and I will get on to a couple of those, but I'm actually going to start off by praising her in one important regard. Yes, I actually think she is getting something right, and more than that, she's getting something right that even maybe a more competent potential Foreign Secretary in Johnson's government would not. Boris Johnson's government is characterised by opposition and even aggression towards other countries, particularly in Europe. Johnson built his leadership on English populism. Any suggestion that other countries would even be our equal, much less do better in anything, doesn't matter what it is, anything at all, cannot possibly be even considered in Boris Johnson's world. Nowhere was this characterised better than during David Frost's time as Brexit Minister. He got nowhere, he achieved nothing. And he never could, because the entire basis of his strategy was predicated on the long abandoned notion of us holding all the cards. When he didn't get his own way, he prepared to unilaterally disband parts of the protocol, the so-called Article 16 route. It went badly wrong when the EU casually suggested that if he smashed a hole in the Northern Ireland Protocol, they would just dissolve the Trade and Cooperation Agreement entirely. Frost was who was ordered to abandon that course, and he left himself nowhere to go. So he resigned. Truss then took over the role as Foreign Secretary. She was already Foreign Secretary at this point. She just adopted the role of dealing with the Northern Ireland Protocol and has taken a very different approach. Yes, you will sometimes hear her chuck out the odd, Article 16, by the way. Yeah, we're totally prepared to go down that road. But she has adopted a much friendlier and more cooperative approach to talks. She's even acknowledged the reality of what the protocol requires. It won't help her actually resolve the problems because Boris Johnson feels unable to accept reality while the ERG are breathing down his neck, but at least she has improved relations and some technical under-the-radar improvements will be possible at some point. Well, it looks like she's taken the same approach to the EU in general. Because shortly after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the EU hosted a meeting, and people said at the time how, decisions are now being made by our continent, for our continent, and we're not at the table, we're not invited. Tragic, absolutely tragic. For all the talk of global Britain, here was another example of just how insular we now are. But a few days ago, end of last week I think, the EU hosted another international meeting which Liz Truss did attend. Now again, she attended as a guest, and that is still not great because it reminds us that we no longer have an automatic right to be there. These meetings were only going to be invited if people think it's useful to do so. And she was also fairly graceless about the meeting. She described it as a meeting of NATO and G7 members, even though it was an EU meeting in Brussels. But despite the petulant public rhetoric, intended purely for a domestic audience, of course, it indicates that she is trying to cooperate behind the scenes because she was invited. And I saw a report that quoted a government official in her department, I think, saying that Truss had been pushing for closer cooperation between the UK and the EU. Now, the Ukraine crisis demands it, of course. I've said before that Johnson's Brexit instincts simply won't do now. Trying to stick two fingers up at our neighbours is likely to have more political costs than gains in future. But this official also said that Truss wants us to work more closely with the EU on security threats in general. That means quite apart from the Ukraine threat, even when the Ukraine crisis is eventually over, she still wants that close cooperation with the EU on security grounds. Now, it needs to be pointed out that the UK is much less safe now as a result of our hard Brexit. A lot of the talk was of the trade, as it would be, but quite unnecessarily we pulled out of several security systems as well. We have lost access to a lot of information for our police and intelligence services. Truss clearly wants that reversing. But this statement is interesting because if Truss really is pushing for this, and she really does believe that we need to work more closely with the EU, at least on security issues, it is an admission of two things, nearly at the top of government, that flies in the face of conventional Brexit doctrine. First, our interests and that of the EU are aligned. Now that's true, but Brexiteers do not like to admit it. Second thing is that we would benefit from closer cooperation with the EU. Again, Brexiteers don't like that either. So despite her drawbacks, which are manifold, Truss's attitude to our allies does look like being much more realistic than many of her colleagues, and certainly more fruitful. So then the question becomes, will she be able to improve relations? Because intent is absolutely vital, and she appears to have that. But unfortunately, competence is where I think she'll fall down. See, competence and effort, really. The problem is that, like her predecessor Dominic Raab and even her boss Boris Johnson, Liz Truss is given the distinct impression that she is bone idle. We know all about the cringeworthy photo shoot she keeps taking part in. Makes her look vacuous, she's not really taking the whole thing seriously. But being honest, they don't stop her doing her job. That's actually someone else's job. Photographer, wardrobe people, get her in an outfit, take a photo, doesn't actually stop her working really hard on her job. You know, she's doing these photo shoots so that she's building up support in the party and you know, so for when there is a leadership bid, and she could easily manage that alongside a workload. It's not really a lot of effort on her part. The problem is the workload isn't there either. The effort's just not there. And I will give you a couple of examples. So before the full-scale invasion, Truss was in an interview, on a Sunday morning interview, and she was warning that Putin was getting ready to launch this attack. And there were many that didn't believe her, even around the world. British and US intelligence were saying, no, this is going to happen. And they got it right. And she was trying to explain, before anyone knew for certain, what the UK government was doing to prepare. And she talked about bolstering our Baltic allies across the Black Sea. Now the problem is, and this was picked up immediately, that Liz Truss is the Foreign Secretary of the United Kingdom, not Turkey. To get to the Baltics from the UK, you go across the North Sea, not the Black Sea. A lot of people picked up on this as an example that Truss, as Foreign Secretary, is really bad at geography. That's not an issue for me. In a democracy, we accept, sometimes even praise, the notion that anyone can rise to the top of politics, even someone with no education. The issue for me was not that she wasn't very good at geography, even European geography. And yeah, I would accept, do you know what, not knowing that it's the North Sea to the west of us, I think that's pretty bad. But that's not the issue for me. The issue for me is that this highlighted not ignorance, but laziness. She knew she was going to do that interview, and she knew what she was going to talk about in that interview. It was her agenda. She was going to go on to talk about a thing. It was her thing. She had access to officials who know what they're talking about. Detailed briefs in order for her to talk fluently and confidently about even complex situations like this. There's no end of ministers in the past have talked about complex things like they knew what they were talking about. Most of the time they've got a very shaky grasp at best. They've just done their work. They've listened to their officials. They've become like Magnus Magnusson, the old host of Mastermind, used to say he'd become an expert on these things for like a day because he, prepared. That she got something so basic wrong means that she didn't properly prepare for that interview. That's laziness. And then there was a select committee meeting recently, very recently. Truss was trying to excuse our piss poor effort on sanctions by blaming legislation. No real answer for why other countries are struggling. They've got laws as well. And apparently, I thought the only laws that were a problem in this country were those pesky EU laws. How come the EU aren't struggling there? But never mind that. You know, and I will also add in here, remember last week Labour did offer to help push through any legislative changes that were needed in a matter of days. If there's anything you need, Prime Minister, Starmer said, Labour will support you. You just say what you think needs changing in the law. If it's necessary, we'll get it done by the end of the week, son. No, that was turned down. But Truss tried to blame a Labour MP, Chris Bryant, for mucking up some legislation. Now, Chris Bryant is very hot on this issue. He's been warning about the threat from Putin for years. So she went to that interview knowing that she was defending an indefensible position and that Bryant would ask some very searching questions. So she needed something to distract with, to fire back at him. So she tried to say, yeah, but we've got trouble with this legislation. Actually, you'll find it's your fault because you messed about with this bit, then blah, blah, blah. And he pointed out to her that actually, I think you'll find I didn't even speak during the third reading of that bill, the bill she's referring to. Now, she hesitated at this point. Then Bryant read from Hansard. That's the record of all parliamentary debates in business and so on. And she hummed and she ha'd because he was reading it through, blah, blah, blah. This person spoke, this person spoke, this person spoke. I didn't speak. And they said, I'll have to ask my officials then. Now, you can focus in on the graceless, unapologetic way in which she got caught out and then failed to apologise for the error there and then. Sorry, I must have mistaken you for someone else type thing. But the bigger point to me is, yet again, failure to prepare. And you know what they say, failing to prepare is preparing to fail, and it's dead right. Another failure to prepare for, again, she knew what the questions were going to be and she had time to prepare her answers. And this time it was for a select committee hearing. You know, I would say more important than a Sunday morning interview. I think they're important as well. But select committee hearings are on record. You've got to get that right. And she went into this with an accusation, should it be needed, because she knew, as I say, Bryant was going to scrutinise her heavily. But she had not even gone to the trouble of checking on Hansard that her cunning wheeze was actually going to work. And you weren't going to fool him because it's his life, isn't it? He knows whether he spoke during that reading or not. And this is where we are going to have a problem. Like, she may genuinely believe that we need to cooperate with our allies, which is good. Again, low bar. You'd expect that of a foreign secretary, but you know, low bar. She's not a committed Brexiteer, remember. She converted to the cause for her career. She's not really, her mind's not in it. You know, so she's fine with the concept of working with other countries, even in Europe. She ain't got a problem with that. But she is swimming against the tide of the loonies in her party on this one. Albeit may be helped by the changing circumstances in Europe now. Because it's now easier for her to work closely with the EU without making it look like she's working with the EU. Because, you know, as she did a few days ago, remember what she said? She said, meeting with NATO and G7 allies. She can just say she's working closely with our NATO allies on security issues. After all, almost all EU nations are members of NATO, and all the major ones are. So it's quite easy for her to talk to her colleagues in other major EU countries about closer cooperation between the UK and the EU and just claim she's talking to NATO members. But if she cannot be bothered to put any work in, and given that although she's not as dumb as some of her cabinet colleagues, nor is she intelligent in the sense you might expect of a senior government minister in a functioning society. So that doesn't bode well for her prospects of success. Doesn't matter how well intentioned. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.